Welcome to this very, very timely, very important panel. When we planned this panel, we couldn't have anticipated how bad the situation was going to become. Obviously, for many, many years and decades, there have been loads of war games going on where people were thinking about the worst case scenario when it comes to supply chain security around the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz, and the worst case scenario has happened. So very timely. We couldn't have anticipated it. We have an amazing panel tonight, this afternoon, that will actually allow us to go into a variety of different domains that are very important to understand the security of supply chains, but also the insecurities around shipping, insurance, the role of the Navy, the role of the private sector in containing this. I want to start by introducing the panelists. I will start with His Excellency Mr. Issam Abdulaziz Al Jassim, the Ambassador of the Kingdom of Bahrain to France. Then we have Vice Admiral Emmanuel Slaas, who's the head of Navy Operations and most importantly has been he was the head of the Indian Ocean Command of the French Navy, so has operated and has run French operations around these very vital straits. To my left, we've got Zaid Belbaghi, who's the CEO of Hardcastle, a consulting firm and one of the leading experts on the Middle East. We've got Oliver Blake, who is a long-standing expert on the Gulf, has lived decades, specifically in Oman, has worked for the private sector and is also an independent analyst on the Gulf. And last but not least, we've got Olivier Arson, who is from the private sector, who's worked in technology, has had various businesses himself, and has worked with supply chains, and is particularly going to talk about today about the role of insurance, because that's certainly something that will affect how we're moving forward. Now, why is it so important? Why is it important that we talk about this? So when I thought about this panel, initially, we knew supply chains were important. We knew that these choke points were important. And for the simple reason that the world that we live in today is a world that is not dominated and run by states. It's not a world of 195 member states. It's a world of networks, of nodes, of intermediaries, interlocutors, of private and public players all working together. So I want you to really think about the world as a massive network of networks, a world of hyperconnectivity, a world of flows of capital, flows of commodities, of energy, data, people, ideas. And if you conceptualize the world in that way, you understand how important the choke points are, the hubs and the interlocutors in this global world of flows. And two of these major choke points in this global world of flows is the Bab al-Mandab between Yemen and the Horn of Africa, and the Strait of Hormuz between Oman and Iran, about which you've probably heard quite a lot over the last couple of weeks on TV. And so instead of looking at a system of states, we have a system of interlocutors, of guardians and gatekeepers. And we've seen now how a country like Iran is becoming a strategic gatekeeper to the flows that make the world, not just in the Gulf and the Middle East, but make the world here in Europe as well. We're very much affected by this. It's also a system where size doesn't necessarily matter. It doesn't matter if you're a great power or you're a superpower, or whether you have the greatest military in the world, because we see that the Americans are very much out of their depth. They are unable to provide the security that is necessary. And it is actually small and middle powers who actually play an outsourced role when they actually come together and build alliances, build something around consensus, rather than doing what Donald Trump has been doing, is using coercion and compulsion to do that. It's a man-made supply chain crisis. I would say it's one of the worst supply chain crises in history. It's one that was entirely avoidable, one that is very, very difficult to manage, but we probably have to live with it for some time. But it's also an opportunity for Europe. And I think we will talk about this afternoon, is the great opportunity that as the Gulf is thinking to disentangle from America, Europe is trying to think how we can disentangle from America. There are opportunities, I think, for Europe and the Gulf countries to come together, work together, not necessarily in a zero-sum game against the Americans, but there is a very important role that I think the European countries, the UK, France, potentially Germany and other countries have to play in supporting these vital networks of flows, as well as helping our partners in the Gulf. I would give the first word to His Excellency. 5 minutes. We're trying to make it as interactive as possible, keeping the interventions short, and then allowing you also in the end to come up with questions for the panel. Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Bonjour à tous. C'est un plaisir d'être ici. I'll speak in English. If you allow me, I did some notes. It's a pleasure to be with you today as a speaker of this roundtable. Recent developments in the Strait of Hormuz, including attacks on commercial vessels, drone activity, missile strikes, and Iranian attacks targeting my country, Bahrain, and other GCC countries, underscore the seriousness of the situation. To begin, maritime checkpoints are no longer just vulnerabilities. They are active conflict zones from the Strait of Hormuz to Bab al-Mandeb. Commercial shipping and critical infrastructure are being directly targeted using tools such as drones, mines, and missiles. Maritime security now means operating in contested environments. Equally important, the core risk is regional fragmentation. The challenge is not only instability, but the need for unified response. Despite strong international concern, limited regional coordination and competing priorities continue to weaken collective security. At the same time, external protection has clear limits. International coalitions help secure sea lanes and stabilize markets, but their response remain largely reactive. They do not address, for example, escalating state-backed attacks, and without doing so, disruptions will persist. Finally, the Arabian Gulf and the Red Sea, from one interconnected maritime security system, what happens in the Strait of Hormuz does not remain contained. It has immediate global consequences, affecting energy markets and security dynamics across the region and beyond. Maritime security can no longer be addressed in isolation. It requires coordinated surveillance, shared intelligence, joint operations, and aligned political strategies across both the Gulf and the Red Sea. Maritime security today is no longer about protecting individual waterways, but about securing an interconnected system that is critical to regional stability and the global economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If I continue to give the word to you, Admiral, from your, putting you're sitting there in your naval uniform with your naval hat on, what is, we would very much like to hear what you have to say from that point of view, as someone who's operated in this very much dangerous environment.
Okay, let's open the discussion with why are we committed into that region. So first, please remember that we have more than 1 million of French inhabitants in that region. Of course, most are in the southwestern part of the Indian Ocean. But we are a nation, we are citizens of the Indian Ocean. And of course, we need to maintain the link between France as the hexagon, if I may say so, and our territories in the Indian Ocean, not only La Réunion Island, but also much further to the east with New Caledonia, etc., etc. So this is pivotal for the sovereignty of France to make sure that we are able to establish the link. Second, we are engaged with our allied and partners in that region. Among the GCC countries, we have several defense agreements and some strategic partnership as well. So what's the difference between the two? For France, a defense agreement is ratified by the Parliament. It's ratified both by the National Assembly and the High Chamber, the Senate. So this is something that engages us. Really, it's not a paper sign on the corner of a table, etc. So this is really important. And in that region, since we effectively France is committed through those defense agreements, for instance, it means that we have, and I think we are, reliable, we are reactive, and we are credible. And maybe I can elaborate with what we are doing today with our partners there. But we've done this already. Each time the defense agreements were activated, it has been, for instance, in 2022 with our UAE friends, it was already activated after some Houthis attacks through UAVs, unmanned air vehicles, as well as some ballistic shots coming from the Houthis. We are, of course, so we were committed with our French Air Force fighters that were based in the UAE, because those defense agreements effectively engage us at that level. And I think it has been appreciated. We were also deeply engaged into the Red Sea from the 8th of December 2023. Since we have a permanency of a destroyer in that region, we were able to effectively take our part of the burden to try to start to secure the South Red Sea. And so our engagement started on the 8th of December 23. Ships were under my command, and on the first night we were starting to protect first convoy, engaging UAVs, and later on ballistic missile shots by the Houthis, and even some salvos of ballistic missiles. So we've been engaged there for 450 days into the Red Sea, which is reasonable amount of effort, if I may say so. We were able to provide our support to various kind of commercial shipping, even to those who were highly targeted, representing some for instance, some US interest, etc. I was able to take some of those ships into protections, and our engagement is enduring. We have also the chance to work with our French Air Force friends that are based in Djibouti, for instance, that provide also some efforts to secure that region in a purely defensive posture. Purely defensive, making sure that we take our part of the burden to maintain a free flow and in accordance with the international law of the sea. So this is why we are committed in the region and what we are doing today.
Thank you very much. Zaid, if I move to you, you wanted to look, I think from what I understand, more towards the Bab al-Mandab, isn't it, and the Horn of Africa?
Events, dear boy, events.
Yes,
things have moved along a little bit, but
yes.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Vice Admiral. Your Excellency, the Ambassador of the Kingdom of Bahrain, thank you for joining us today. I'd also like to thank personally Général de Courage and Général Breton for inviting me here, and for Vice Admiral Slaas for importantly being here, despite being very busy at this time. I have never prepared for a public engagement where the news has changed so frequently that all of this could be completely irrelevant by the time I see you today. It is very plausible that by Friday what I will say is no longer true, but I think that's testament to how important these events are and how they impact our daily lives. For the first time in modern history, 2 of the world's 5 critical maritime choke points are closed at the same time to commercial shipping. No contingency framework was ever built for this scenario, and yet we are here. Together, these 2 straits touch nearly 30% of global seaborne trade. The IEA calls this the biggest energy supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Crude is over $100 a barrel even this morning. But if we reduce what is happening to a simple US and Israel versus Iran confrontation, we will consistently misread the situation. The parameters are set by international powers, but this crisis is being shaped by a wider group of middling actors. The United States has borne the heavy lifting with nearly 2,000 targets struck and 2 carrier strike groups assigned to the region. However, Washington, though bearing the military cost of this corridor, the economic benefits are shared globally. While China has quietly negotiated bilateral passage exemptions with Tehran, it has not contributed to the defense of the Straits. This asymmetry is becoming politically very difficult to sustain and will do so in the coming decades. What makes this closure from anything we have seen before is a combination of physical and digital warfare operating simultaneously. You would have seen the announcements today from Amazon in Bahrain and the effect on data cables. Iranian jamming is being used offensively and consistently to make the strait digitally as well as physically impassable. Over the weekend, it was the largest amount of shipping that went dark from GPS in history. The result is extraordinary. Bloomberg's analysis recently found that 340 ships present in the Gulf, only 16% were broadcasting their GPS. 84% of the ships passing through the straits are passing in the dark. Iran does not need to sink every ship in the straits to paralyze the corridor. It only needs to make the uncertainty intolerable enough to stop people shipping there voluntarily. The insurance market was the first to understand this. All 12 members of the international group of P&I clubs, which cover 90% of the world's shipping insurance, immediately cancelled their Gulf cover in the immediacy passing of the war starting. I want to now spend a moment looking at regional actors because they are consistently underweighted in this kind of analysis and matter enormously. Turkey's military presence in Qatar is the first sustained Turkish military engagement in the Gulf since Ottoman troops left the Gulf in the First World War. It's the same in the Gulf of Aden, where Turkish troops are now based in Somalia, the first post-Ottoman such engagement. Turkey is not simply a NATO partner that is in a familiar theatre. It is a re-emerging international actor operating in the Gulf with its own strategic memory, maintaining new relationships and old with both the Houthis and Western partners simultaneously. It will not be captured in any single international security architecture, and that's the way that things will take place more and more. Bahrain, the smallest country in the GCC, has borne a disproportionate amount of Iranian attack due to 2 decades spent hosting maritime infrastructure in the region, the US's Fifth Fleet and the UK's naval support facility at Jufair. Since the 28th of February, it has intercepted hundreds of missiles and hundreds of drones. Its refinery has been struck twice, and a desalination plant has been hit. And yet Bahrain, despite the undue pressure it has been under, was the only Arab Gulf state to sign the March statement for joint maritime reopening of the Gulf. This is a country that's choosing to stand with the international order, again, at considerable cost to itself. Over the last 2 decades, Bahrain has been the only Arab country that has joined every major international maritime peacekeeping operation in the region, and that is why today we find it under undue pressure. Israel, for its part, needed Hormuz degraded as an Iranian power projection tool. In achieving that, it has triggered the conditions under which Bab el-Mandeb now looks under increased threat. This, by a paradox of fate, is the trade corridor that Israel itself is most dependent upon. The UAE, meanwhile, which, as we all know, has built its entire economic model on being an entrepot for international business and trade, has both its primary maritime corridors simultaneously interrupted and its major airports closed. The old assumption that great powers would converge on stability because the alternative served nobody else no longer holds. In an old institution like this where we sit today, that is incredibly prevalent. Any serious security framework for these corridors must be built on aligned interests and genuine international cooperation. Right now, finding those avenues for cooperation is the challenge that we face. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zaid. You touched on a lot of interesting topics that I think we need to go into a little bit deeper. But you were talking about a security framework already, and I would give it to Oliver Oliver Blake, looking from where you are, often lived on the eastern part of the Strait of Hormuz, looking at frameworks, looking at order. How do you see things?
Thank you, Andreas. It's warm, and I know we're under tight time constraints, so I will be brief, reiterate a few points that have been made already, and perhaps put forward a few other ideas, seed a few ideas which I'd like, hopefully, for us to have time to discuss later on. To reiterate, first of all, as Said said, the IEA has stipulated this is the worst energy crisis the world has seen. And just to put that into complete context, it is worse than 1975 and 73 and 79 put together, combined. 20% of global oil has been affected, which is double the Suez crisis. I was still learning about the Suez crisis 40 years after it happened. So the decisions that are made in the coming weeks, we will be learning about for many decades to come. And all of this has happened without even having seen the Houthis enter this conflict the way they did a couple of years ago, as we've just heard as well. Imagine what happens if the Red Sea is once again restricted or shut. I'm going to slightly resist the temptation to go into the weeds and talk about the detail of the current conflict. There is much to discuss. Others will do it better than me, especially the Admiral who served in that area. I want to look beyond the current conflict because I think whilst it's going on, we need to start planning for what next. We need to look at what the structural changes should and could be that will prevent this happening again. Already, downstream, we've seen a huge global effect of what's happened in Hormuz. Qatar produces 35% of the world's helium. Wasn't a notable statistic before this war, but that is the input to MRA machines in hospitals. It is required for semiconductor manufacturing and all sorts of other critical industries. Fertilizer, 10% comes out of that strait. Food inflation is already being seen, not just in Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India, but as far afield as Canada as well, and of course Europe. The shifts, the drastic shifts in bond prices that we're seeing are not just temporary movements. It's beginning to look like medium-term uncertainty. Carnegie Europe put a very interesting piece out very recently, about a week ago, saying that Europe has spent so long worrying about life without America, and now we're dealing with an America that is no longer a stabilizing force. It is an America that is supercharging economic coercion and transactional diplomacy. Britain was once the guardian of freedom of navigation on the high seas. Britain can no longer do that on its own, and no European country can do it on its own, and no Gulf country can do it on its own. But we share, and as Andreas referenced this earlier on in the talk, we share a common problem, Europe and the Gulf. We've become too codependent on US security, and we're now seeing the price of that codependence. We need to work towards a more interdependent relationship. And I think there's a great opportunity looking ahead to the post-conflict period, a great opportunity for medium power interdependence between Europe and the Gulf. With Gulf capital, intelligence, and energy leverage combined with European technology, innovation, and military capability, we can put in place a European Gulf maritime framework that combines military and security capability with industrial logistics and financial, commercial, insurance know-how to start to address some of the issues that we've seen recently. And I'll finish just on that one point about the insurance market. Insurance is not just a commercial consideration, a subsequent afterthought. It's a signal of systemic confidence. And at this moment, that confidence has all but gone. It won't be simply that the drones have stopped flying that reassures the insurance markets that they can now sensibly price insurance for those ships. Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb won't return to normal risk pricing until the underwriters can see a credible multilateral security architecture underpinned by something both Europe and the Gulf believes in, and that is a rules-based order. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's a great segue from Oliver to Olivier about insurance. Obviously, you're the man from the commercial side, and you've seen how industry has been affected, the private sector has been affected. What's your view on how this is unfolding, particularly looking at insurance?
So yeah, as quick introduction, I think we all have a feel of surprise here somehow, and we shouldn't. Everything in this crisis is known since at least 5 years, if not more. Drones, we have had low-cost drones in Ukraine for over 5 years now. Shaheds, the only thing that US has been able to bring against the Shahed in this conflict is a copy of the Shahed, not yet produced, but a copy, not an original. So I think, again, I'm a civilian. I'm not going to talk about the military, but I have a sort of interpretation on this. We've been sleeping through all these 5 years. And why have we been sleeping? Because we thought there was a police. We thought we were still living in Pax Americana, so somehow this would not happen. We are in a war school here. I think many of you have read the Strategy of Conflict by Thomas Schelling, Nobel Prize for this. It was written back in the 60s. If you haven't read it, I suggest now is the time to read it, because we're entering a different world. What this book is saying is that there are two types of worlds when you play a game. There is a world with police. In a world with a police, something super powerful above the players, you play certain rules. In a world without police, you need to play a totally different set of rules, where threat, promises, all that type of stuff becomes the only rules of the game. And this game is a lot more complex than a game with police. So I think what this conflict signals is we have entered officially, it's been 5 years really, but we have now entered officially a world without police, where strategy is becoming very important, the strategy of conflict. In that world, that same Thomas Schelling says insurance is key, and actually in the following up remarks, I tried to drill down why the civilian response to this type of things can be through insurance.
Thank you very much. So a lot of things that we heard now, you're touching upon some of the assumptions that we've had over the last decades, particularly in the Gulf, has been that America is going to underwrite security and that America is going to be the security guarantor. Europe was somewhat of an afterthought. If I start with Your Excellency, a question from point of view of Bahrain, you're right at the heart of it. You've been probably more victimized by this conflict than any other country in the GCC. You know, your GDP is mostly reliant on the export of oil, export of aluminum. Both of them are currently not being exported, so you're being very, very badly hit. What is your point of view in terms of security moving forward? What do you see the role of Europe to be? And do you think that you would reconsider, reevaluate the relationship with the United States?
Thank you for the question. Let me start with the relationship with the U.S. The American presence reflects a long-standing strategic bilateral relationship between Gulf states and the states, built on mutual interests, sustained cooperation, and shared commitment to regional stability. At the same time, Gulf states, including Bahrain, have pursued a policy of diversifying the military partnerships. This includes strengthening defense cooperation with key partners such as France, the UK, reflecting a broader strategy of enhancing flexibility and resilience. Example, the defense agreement signed between the Kingdom of Bahrain and France in February 2026, which further deepens cooperation in areas such as defense cooperation, training, and security collaboration. That's one. Going back to what extent the strategic autonomy to be achieved and diversifying, I would say Gulf countries have significantly expanded their defense and strategic ties beyond the United States. The diversification allows Gulf states to enhance flexibility and increase their strategic options. It enables access to a wider range of capabilities. GCC now is diversifying their security provider while building multi-partner network to enhance flexibility, reduce risk, and increase their strategic options. There are also greater investment in domestic defense capabilities and regional diplomacy, further reinforcing the shift toward a more diversified security posture. The United States still provides the most comprehensive security framework in the region, particularly in terms of naval presence, intelligence, and integrated defense system. And Bahrain's hosting the United States Fifth Fleet remains a clear example of this continued resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I want to move on to Admiral, representing France here. Over the last 3 weeks, conversations I've had with friends in the Gulf, from Saudi Arabia to Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, they all seem to suggest that there is an issue with America, that they are not reliable. They feel they've been left alone by Donald Trump, have been thrown into the mixer and became collateral damage in the war that they didn't choose, that they didn't want, that they were lobbying against. Equally, the Royal Air Force, obviously, the UK has a very strong relationship with Qatar, hence the Royal Air Force has played a very important role there in defending the Qatari airspace from drones coming in. Admiral, could you unpack a little bit what the role of France is in defending the Gulf, and to what extent this is a complementary sort of role that France can play in terms of Gulf security?
Okay, so I may come back on some of the words that were given by my friend panelist today. I would like to underline the fact that despite there are some major actors, and that maybe some may consider that we are not playing in the same category or division, if I would take a kind of soccer image. Just like I told you before, we are committed there with our level of strength, but mostly with our values. And we stick to that values. Of course, it goes through the defense agreements and through the forces that are pre-positioned in the region. And we try as much as we can to be a force that generates other commitments. So 2 examples. I discussed about the Red Sea. So as I told you, French Navy ships were engaged into the Red Sea from the 8th of December 2023 until today, although today we are sometimes in Arabian Sea more than in the Red Sea, but on a regular basis, and it was still the case in the very last few weeks, we are providing accompaniment to the shipping and even to ships that could be effectively targeted by the Houthis. So we shift from national commitments to an EU commitment. And so sometimes some may consider that the EU is, I would say, sometimes it's too slow, etc. But I will not come.
I think your president called them brain dead, or was it in reference to NATO? I don't remember.
Let's give a look to what was put on the table with Aspides. So in a bunch of weeks, we were able effectively to launch an EU operation there, which was strictly defensive. And for instance, we shift our commitment from national to Aspides as soon as it was able to work in the region. So of course, more can be done, but it's not too bad. And I'm happy to see this EU operation there. And we were also the force, providing energy to another initiative that took place from 2020 to 2024, which was a European initiative. It was not an EU one. It was launched after the fact that the GCPOA was put at risk after some nations decided to withdraw from this agreement, and so the situation changed in the region. And again, in a bunch of weeks, we were able to launch an operation to secure the maritime flow in the Strait of Hormuz. It was built up by 9 European nations, including Norway, which is not an EU member state, but they are fully committed. And we were able to effectively, during those 4 years, to provide accompaniments to the shipping into the Strait of Hormuz. And so maybe, for sure, one day or another, we will come back also to this kind of solution, because the Strait needs to reopen. And the question is, what is the threat level that can be taken into account to have this kind of initiative again, with a defensive posture? Okay, and beyond this, we are committed with our GCC friends inside the Arabian Gulf, of course, to provide effectively as much security as we can give them. It's effectively the case with the UAE, with Qatar. We also provide some air defense capability to others. So we stick to our sayings. And we try also to mobilize our European partners also. And we are happy to see that they are also with us. So for instance, the French Carrier Group around the nuclear carrier Charles de Gaulle is operating in the East Med, where we are protecting our Cyprus friends, being ready for, of course, other commitments. And we're extremely happy to see that we have a Dutch air defense destroyer that came with us straight, a Spanish air defense destroyer that also committed with us, and an Italian one as well. So there are also other security players that are taking their part of the burden.
Can I go a cheeky follow-up question? Because you were mentioning the previous European operation in the Strait of Hormuz that you led. Can you explain to the audience that the security environment, the threat environment at the time was very different than what it is today? Because the media suggests now, why are we not, and Donald Trump does as well, why don't we just send our navies in there to secure it through escorts? Is that currently feasible?
Well, it all depends of the level of threat. And for the moment, the level of threat is not compatible with this kind of operation. One can imagine that we can go and make an escort into the Strait of Hormuz maybe once or twice, but don't imagine that with the current level of threat, we can re-establish the normal flow easily. And beyond the level of threat, the question, it has been mentioned before, is the insurance company, who are able to do their own analysis of the risks, would say, gentlemen, to me, this is not compatible with the level of risk based on my assessment, so I'm not giving you insurance.
Yep.
And in our world, I don't think that some major Occidental maritime operator would agree to pass through the strait again. So the level of threat must reduce. I'm not saying that it has to be zero, because it's
won't be.
But it has to be reduced so that effectively, collectively, with a defensive involvement and also in a full agreement with maritime operators, insurance company, through the coordination cells that we have for naval cooperation and guidance for shipping. For instance, we have a center in Brest that is maintaining the permanent contact with with French maritime operator, and we are doing it also for EU maritime operations. This is something that we need to work together, and when our political masters will decide to, we'll be in a position, for instance, to re-establish something that has already existed in the past. And in that room, we have some senior personnel who were committed to maritime security in that region earlier, with another level of threat, with other objects. Because today, we have a terrible spread of different threatening assets beyond mines, etc., etc. But the time will come, for sure.
Yes. Thank you very much. Zaid, if I... Do you want to come into...
I just want to add to what the Admiral said. there are opportunities now. For example, I was approached a few days ago by CMA CGM company. It's a huge company that shipping, and they're looking at other options, other opportunities. So there are challenges, but there are other new opportunities on how to secure and how to move around. Interestingly, our domestic market has remained stable. So there are. Wait, I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Very good point. Can I ask you, Zaid, about because we talked about role Europeans can play, France can play, complementing the US. What about, we talk a lot about the multipolar world, and you already touched upon it. I mean, you touched upon Turkey. What surprised me the most, or maybe not surprised me at all, is that the Chinese have been kind of sitting back, eating popcorn and saying, don't interrupt our enemy, or don't interrupt my enemy when he's making a mistake. We've seen the Russians as well really benefiting from this war. Where do you see the multipolar world? Where do you see Pakistan? Where do you see India?
I will answer your question, and if I may follow up with a few things that the Vice Admiral said. I think the multipolarity of this is striking. People have noted, for example, Russia's role or absence from this theatre. It was Russia that abled, within 48 hours, to support Iran on damage that the US had caused. The hidden hand there is quite prevalent. In terms of China, I mean, they have had 47 escort operations in Hormuz for the last 2 years. I think that's significant.
Yep.
And I think we'll see more of that. In terms of Turkey in the Gulf and in the Gulf of Aden, that's significant. As you know, when we last met, all we were speaking about was Saudi-UAE rivalry. Yes. And that's all about the Red Sea. The UAE base in Socotra, its activity in Yemen, Saudi efforts to build a multinational organization in the Red Sea. You have the Russians in Port Sudan. You have the Turks in Somalia. You have the Russians in Eritrea, the French in Djibouti, the Emiratis in Somaliland, the Israelis in Somaliland. The prevalence of these bases in that part of the world shows you their strategic importance, and then flowing very, seamlessly into the responses I had on multipolarity. I came here from Le Monde newspaper, and I was very interested in getting the French response as to France's very rapid response in the Gulf region, which Gulf allies have really appreciated. I think in the UAE, the treaty is such that France must respond within 1 day, which it did. And my interlocutor at Le Monde said, no, we'd rather this money be spent on social spending in France, which already has one of the largest social spending bills in the world, rather than on naval facilities. Yep. But I disagree. We can only pontificate on those matters in Europe, but we rely upon items coming from East Asia, fuel coming from the Gulf, and maritime security simply cannot be assumed by others. The French president, at the inception of new naval submarines before the war started, said that to be feared, you must be respected, and to be respected, you must be feared. And unfortunately, that's the reality of deploying power. And where you mentioned, Doctor, about this, Europe looking at this as an afterthought, I think it's actually a resumption of normal duties. The UK and France had large navies throughout history, and the essential part of hard power projection, level 1, is having a navy, which is why the US destroyed the Iranian navy immediately. When the Nazis occupied France, the first thing the UK did was destroy the French fleet at Toulon, the whole French fleet, which Vichy France was very upset about, but it was essential so that the French fleet didn't go into the hands of the Nazis. So I think looking at naval matters more importantly going forward, assuming some sort of multilateral situation, I think is very important. When we talk about de-risking, like the ambassador said, de-risking is too often seen as a short-term reaction. We have to de-risk in the long term the very ambitious undersea fiber cables from Singapore to Bahrain to Marseille, which are being working on. This is a global project. This is a human project. You want fast internet and you live in Paris, you need the pipeline to go from Singapore to Bahrain to Marseille. So I think increasingly, given the shared interconnected lives that we have, this is very important. Interestingly, the footnote to this is that countries like Turkey, now that it has discovered gas, and Iran generally, can close their doors and continue living forever. They are unreliant upon the world, whereas our exposure to the rest of the world for basic foodstuffs, for fuel, etc., makes the rest of the world quite vulnerable. And the last point is, in the Gulf, the nature of defense agreements are now under review. Yeah. And we're seeing, the fine detail. Does this defense agreement mean that Pakistan will come to the Gulf's defense? Because there was great fanfare when it signed an agreement with Saudi Arabia in September. Nothing has happened. Saudi Arabia signed a defense pact with Turkey in January. Saudi Arabia is in distress. Where is Turkey? So I think countries all rushing to sign agreements with France is something that will be a major outcome of this conflict.
Yes. Your point about, and that's a great segue for Oliver, talking about de-risking and redirecting supply chains and kind of finding potential backups. And we're seeing one of these backups. You were born, not many people know, you're British, but you were born in Oman. And can you allude a little bit to the very important role that Oman plays as a maritime gatekeeper, but also, most importantly, as some sort of strategic backup for the supply of the Gulf, and not just in terms of energy, but food and so on and so forth?
Certainly, I think, for many years, Oman, having sat outside of the Strait of Hormuz, has had a lower risk premium assigned to it by the Joint War Committee in the UK. And it has that level of depth that allows it to be a gateway to the region. So now we're seeing in real time a food supply channel from Oman's ports into the rest of the Gulf as they seek to airlift, I think something like, the Gulf would require something like 90 million pounds of food a day, which I think from memory is about 12 times what the United Nations would do across its entire global portfolio of countries it supports. So a huge requirement to get food into the Gulf. I think the UAE and Oman have now signed a new logistics corridor to enable the movement of equipment and items that were due for Jebel Ali to come in through Oman. Going back even before this crisis, we saw during the Red Sea crisis, when the Houthis were targeting shipping in the area, we saw a very interesting agreement between Oman and Saudi Arabia to allow shipping to come into Salalah ports, offload, and then be moved by land into Saudi and then into Jeddah and back onto ships. So I think Oman does present strategic depth to the whole region. But beyond that, I think the most interesting role that Oman has in this is it has always been the enabler of dialogue in the region. We've seen it so many times with the P5+1, the previous nuclear agreement that was achieved with Iran, which Donald Trump pulled out of. That was enabled by talks in Oman. As a peace broker, they enabled with Saudi Arabia the ceasefire in Yemen, and have been involved in so many other arrangements and agreements quietly in the background. And I think we need them again. I think that I'm afraid I'm not convinced by the potential mediation of Pakistan in this instance. I think you need a country that in no way has any political agenda, is not trying to win the region, has no aspirations for depth in Africa or anything like that. You need a country whose only agenda is to achieve peace. And from my experience, my whole life, that is the Omanis.
And despite everything that's been said in the media, the Qataris and the Omanis are still very much behind the scene, despite the fact that they say at the moment we're not mediating. They still maintain very, very key back channels. Olivier, on the way here, we spoke about, what is the real solution from an insurance point of view. We heard from the Admiral that we probably have to live with a level of insecurity for some time to come. We have to resume shipping. We'll have to rebuild confidence, which is going to be difficult. But you were saying that there might be something else in an insurance market point of view, and this is something that was put to me by a very senior Qatari royal last week, who was saying, is there something we can do as the Gulfies if, let's say, Lloyd's of London doesn't underwrite shipping? Is there something that we can do to help underwrite, or kind of, how can we support the insurance market to ensure that our LNG, our oil, our ships can actually go through the Strait of Hormuz?
First thing, just to give perhaps a little bit wider view at the impact. There are two types of impacts today on private sector. The first type of impact, I think Oliver just discussed it a bit, is the goods that are imported from these countries. Everybody thinks about oil, but think also about the derivative products. If you take naphtha, for example, one of the petrochemicals that's used then in plastics and so on, Asia is importing about 60% of this from the region. So that's the primary effect, and you get the same from aluminum. I have a whole cheat list when you have time. So many of those things that you cannot replace. The primary effect is what we talk in the press right now. Some of this primary effect is relatively short term. I think Olivier already discussed helium. Helium cannot be stored. It's the smallest molecule in the world. It just evaporates. There is about 1 month's worth of storage of helium. South Korea is using 60% of its helium from that very source. So we all talk about AI. Extreme ultraviolet lithography requires helium. Helium is gone in about a month. Then you get the ripple effect. Say, back to plastics. Plastic bags, not so interesting. Take in my case, we manufacture about 250,000 trackers every year. These trackers are worth, say, 500 euros. The casing is worth 2 euros out of the 500. But if you don't get the casing, you don't ship. So that's the primary effect, and it's like a snowball. We are really only at the beginning of the snowball. We see the immediate effects, and the longer-term effects will come in 2, 3, 4 months. Then this is for goods that originate from the region. But the Suez Canal was the expressway, used to be the expressway. Sometimes I hear that it's now disturbed. Actually, it's been disturbed for a long time. Since the French operations in 2023, the freight forwarders no longer go through the canal. They go through the Cape. And I want to underline the impact also on private sector there. And this has been ongoing for a couple of years already. You add 3,000 nautical miles. You add about 14 days on a journey that was taking about 20-ish. So you add 50% to the duration, which means you mobilize your capital for 50% more time. If you have $2 million worth of goods on the sea, these goods are going to be on the sea for 50% more time. So you need more capital. So there is a huge cost to the economic world way beyond just being blocked, just by being de-optimized. And of course, for me, this is the sort of warning of what's to come. It's the worst crisis so far. I believe it's just a rehearsal of what's going to happen when Taiwan kicks in. And maybe I'm going a little bit out of the subject, but just to introduce the insurance topic, through this Iranian crisis, we see the power of blockade, and we see the power of blocking essential goods for the world. Think of the impact China has on essential goods for the world. We've just been talking how much we import from the regions in the Gulf. How much do we import from China today? What if China stops those imports? What about the blockade of Taiwan? That's the next step. It's way, way bigger than what we see today. And I'm arguing, and perhaps I'll develop later to not exceed my 5 minutes, but the private industry is just not taking any signal, any price signal of the risk today. We just buy cheap. We buy cheap from very, very risky sources. And I think it's a role of government to force us, and we need to be forced because there is competition. There needs to be a unifying role to force the private sector to price the risk. If not, when the next crisis kicks in, 2 years, 3 years from now, we'll be completely naked. We're half naked right now.
Yes. And to the point of maybe having some sort of sovereign underwriting, is that something that you think is feasible? Because obviously, if you look at Qatar, Saudi, and the UAE, extremely wealthy countries, they could create some sort of infrastructure to help underwrite some of their shipping themselves, kind of taking over, swallowing some of that risk. Do you think that is feasible? Some sort of partnership?
For 5 minutes.
Not in 5 minutes, but maybe 2 minutes.
So kicking on the insurance thing, obviously whenever there is risk, there is insurance. The first thing that governments could do together, they need to do it together, is to force the industry to insure the supply risks. This does not exist today. Remember COVID, masks, no masks, all the essential goods that suddenly we didn't have. If the industry was forced to cover with an insurance all of their suppliers, you would not supply from the same sources. You would diversify your sources. So this is the first thing at structural level that governments could do to make the situation a little bit better to the next crisis. Now, more focused on the naval problem, today what we have is not a military blockade, it's an insurance blockade, as the Admiral highlighted. Because today, insuring, it used to be 0 to 15 cost of the hull to insure one trip. Now it's 1.5%. So it's about $1.5 million for every trip, which means you no longer do the trip. Whenever there is such non-insurable, that price means one thing, it's non-insurable. There are many other risks that are non-insurable. Massive floods, earthquakes, terrorism. How do governments cover this? They cover this by creating sovereign insurance. So the private insurance sector is backed up by government on those risks. And exactly as you pointed, I think the countries in the regions are rich, and they could do this. They could act as underwriters to existing maritime insurance to dramatically cost down the insurance, which then allows military action to be effective. Because if you would have only military action today, say efficient drones, it wouldn't be enough to make the private sector able to insure war risks. You need military action and insurance, and I think the countries in the regions can be very active in being a reinsurer, a sort of Munich Re of the military insurance there.
Thank you very much. Oliver, do you wanted to come in before, because we have to open up to the floor?
Just very quickly, I was going to say, I think even if there was insurance in place, and this is my belief, that the US and Israel unilaterally started this war, I don't see them being able to unilaterally end it. I mean, we thought yesterday, according to Donald Trump, it was over. Like, it doesn't end until all parties say we're no longer going to attack shipping in the region. So I think even if insurance was in place now, if the Iranians still decided to target ships, there is very little that can be done to defend them. Admiral.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the question is the level of threat. And the insurance company are able to make their own assessment with the level of threat. So it goes, we do our threat analysis, and they are doing their own. And as they are professional, it matched most of the time. The fact is that we are able to deal with a higher level of risks, except when there are some special agreements with the insurance company.
Yeah. And so what we essentially have is some sort of partnership between the public and the private sector. The Navy is providing their part, but it will leave a gap that has to be filled by the private sector. And thank you very much. Please join me in thanking this amazing panel. Thank you very much. And thanks to you.